Welcome everyone to Bethesda Green's Innovation Lab's Summer Speaker Series, Tackling Environmental Challenges Through Sustainable Entrepreneurship. During this series, we will discuss ideas that impact people, the planet, and profits. My name is Patty Simonton, and I'm the director of the Be Green Business Program here at Bethesda Green. Thank you for taking the time to join us for our fourth session of our series, Climate Risk Management for Early Stage Startups. Before we get started, I'd like to take just a minute to introduce you to our work here at Bethesda Green. Located just outside of Washington, D.C. in Bethesda, Maryland, we work to address environmental challenges by creating a sustainable green community built collaboratively through citizen engagement, environmental education, government partnership, and innovative business development. We organize our work under two primary programs, which we call our Be Green Business and our Be Green Living programs. Bethesda Green's Be Green Living program works to elevate community engagement and enhance the quality of life for Bethesda area residents. Our community projects include efforts to improve stormwater management, promote street-level community recycling, and improve access to green space, clean energy, and transportation. Our Environmental Leaders program supports environmental education for high school seniors, cultivating the next generation of visionary green leaders. Under our Be Green Business program, we support leaders who are building for-profit business models around innovative and sustainable solutions to tackle environmental and social challenges. Through our B Corp program, we advise existing local businesses through the process of B Corp certification and help them discover and implement best practices for sound governance, support for workers, and sustainability. Finally, through our Innovation Lab, we support companies developing impactful business models with a focus in the areas of environmental sustainability and sustainable food systems through 4 distinct programs. These programs enable us to provide relevant and timely support to companies from idea stage through seed and Series A. Applications are rolling for both our incubator and our amplifier programs. Applications will open shortly for our spring 2022 accelerator cohort, and interested founders are strongly encouraged to join our incubator as early as possible to benefit from our year-round programming. I invite all founders who are ready to join our growing community to email me at innovationlab@bethesdagreen.org if you'd like to learn more. And finally, before we jump into today's panel discussion, I'd like to acknowledge our amazing network of partners and sponsors for believing in us and the work that we do. Today, I'm pleased to welcome these leaders in their field to share their thoughts with us today. Unfortunately, Corey Nelson is unable to join us due to a last-minute family emergency, and we wish her and her family well. Dr. Aurele Houngbedji is a financial risk management professional with over 20 years of experience and expert knowledge of economic capital management, best practices, risk management, and climate change related financial risk management. He leads the climate change related financial risks team and the research and knowledge unit in the corporate risk management department at the International Finance Corporation. His current research focuses on the integration of climate related financial risks and opportunities into risk management, strategy, capital planning, and decision-making process. From 2012 to 2016, he served as special advisor to the president of Benin, where he set up a delivery unit to lead an ambitious reforms agenda to improve investment climate, attract private investments, and promote Benin around the world as a good investment destination in Africa. He holds a PhD in mathematical finance from the University of Pittsburgh. He's an alumnus of the Harvard Kennedy School, the Harvard Business School, and the University of Cambridge Institute of Sustainability Leadership. He's also a member of the directors of the Chief Risk Officers Group. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Zachary Kaplan is vice president at DAI Sustainable Business Group. He joined DAI in 2012 as a technical specialist supporting the organization's work globally in small and medium-sized enterprise development, infrastructure, public-private partnerships, and extractive industries. In 2015, he launched the DAI Sustainable Business Group to lead the firm's engagement with commercial clients seeking to invest and expand in growth markets around the world, while at the same time delivering development benefits in terms of local jobs, local value creation, and local enterprise development. Previously, Zach worked for the World Bank on infrastructure, extractive energy issues, private sector development, natural resource concession management, public-private finance, and business-friendly policy regimes related to local content and supply chain management. He has advised governments, including those of Canada, Mexico, Mozambique, and Romania, and multinational companies such as Chevron, ExxonMobil, Shell, and Walmart. He co-facilitates DAI's local content masterclass and serves on the advisory board for mining shared value in the Georgetown University McCourt's School Policy and Action, which he co-founded in 2007. Zachary earned a master's in public policy and international policy and development from Georgetown and a BA in history and Spanish literature from Cornell. I'm thrilled that both of you could join us today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much.
So I'd like to start with a few questions for both of you, and then we'll open up the conversation to questions from our attendees. Everyone is invited to share your questions and comments in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll aim to answer as many as we can. During today's conversation, I'd like to discuss ways that climate risk management through mitigation and adaptation is vital for building a business in today's world. Specifically, that it presents an opportunity for companies to proactively address the challenges of climate change and other global crises. We'll explore various system-wide and forward-looking implementation strategies to incorporate climate risk management techniques into your business model from day one that can evolve as the business grows and changes. Aurele, I'm going to start with you. Could you please begin by clarifying some definitions for us? How do you define climate risk? And could you please connect the dots for our listeners about climate risk, or about how climate risk is increasingly recognized as a financial risk?
Thank you very much. And this is a good question. I think it's always good to start with definition so you can have the same level of understanding before we start talking. Climate risk is a financial loss associated with climate change, and also associated with the politics, economics, and environmental response to climate change. So you have the physical aspects and you have the transition aspects. So you can break financial risk into two groups. The transition risks are the one we are already living today. You see what happened in California, you see what happened on the East Coast, and you see what happened in different places in the world, in Europe last month about the flood. All those are physical events, physical climate change events that's happening today. We're already living that today. And we can classify them as acute, like a cyclone, a hurricane, flood, or you can classify them as chronic, which is rise sea level and heat waves. Now you move to the second type of climate risk, which is a transition risk. The transition risks are the one associated with the transition to low carbon economy. So mainly due to legal policy, government policies, technology, and market change. So when we're moving, everybody's moving to, or the trend is to move to electric car, that will be have implication in terms of transition risk for many companies around the world. So those are the two categories of climate risk, the main categories of climate risk we're looking at for my perspective. And how do you link that into financial risks? So you have several ramifications. The transmission channels are at several levels. When you take, for example, the physical risk, either or transition risk, both of them can impact both credit risk, market risk, operation risk, as well as reputational risk. As a risk manager, we know how to manage those risks. When we talk about credit risk, we know what we're talking about. But in addition to what we already measure as a classical credit risk, climate risk can impact and bring also additional credit risk to what we already knew how to do. And that's why that's one of the links. Climate risk, for example, impacts revenue. It impacts cost. It impacts capex. And it impacts income, and cash flow. So when all those different type of line items on the balance sheet are impacted, clearly you have implications for financial. When you lend money to a corporation, for example, to build a power plant, and let's say a hydropower plant, for example. So the power plant, for example, needs water to run, and you invest $100 million in that. What happens in a 5-year time when there is no water, or there's not enough water to run the power plant at full capacity? That will present a financial risk for the company due to physical risk from climate. And the bank that lend money to that company clearly will be in difficult situation. We saw a couple of years ago the PEG, a utility company in California, due to the fires, have filed for bankruptcy. And that also is what we call the first bankruptcy due to climate change in the world. So those are the direct implications of climate change onto financial health. We can give so many examples. So I think when we continue the discussion, I can give more examples to be able to elaborate on different type of risk that link directly to finance, like stranded assets, all those type of due to the transition risk from big power plants that have invested significantly into physical assets, and the transition we take them to be able to lose for the asset to lose value, and that also is a critical in terms of financial risk. So we can elaborate more on that as we go in the discussion.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. I mean, there's really just so many moving pieces in this world. And Zach, I'm interested, could you build on that a little bit for us? Can you tell us a little bit more about the ecosystem that exists around the climate risk management industry? Who are some of the players involved?
Well, lots, and more getting involved, and I think perhaps everybody at this point. And if they're not involved, they should be, because this is something that affects all of us. I think, and I would add to that, if you didn't believe that 18 months ago, I think the events of the last 18 months have proven that we are all impacted from climate around the world. I think COVID has accelerated our awareness and our acknowledgement that this is here, that it structures, it's reshaping our lives, it's reshaping our businesses, and I know something we'll talk about is even reshaping opportunity for us. But you certainly have governments who are setting, putting down the bumpers on the bowling lanes and setting what the rules and the targets should be, and there's still a lot of dissonance and non-convergence around what those can be. Unfortunately, a lot of that is subject to politics, which as practitioners in the field, we don't like to see, but is a reality that we do. That being said, even the strongest of political personalities, I don't think are going to be able in the medium to long run fight the trend and fight what nature will win here. So we need to work with it. You certainly have the development institutions, IFC, where my colleague works, bilateral agencies like USAID, individual development banks, regional development banks, multilateral development banks, but all of those institutions that have ultimate beneficiaries and impact in mind around the world and are really looking at these things from a global perspective, very, very much. I think breaking it down to the next level, you have the multinational corporations and the large providers of goods and services that are delivering to consumers around the world what they want. That could be an energy company, that can be a renewables company, that could be Facebook and Google, Walmart, Lululemon, you name it. But all of these things, all of these companies are providing goods to humanity that we want, and they're all shifting their mindsets around what this new world means, what it means, what climate means to them. The SME level, and I would add in there, although very, very different, we have the micro enterprise, the budding entrepreneur, as well as the small and medium-sized enterprise. That is the growth engine of every economy. Those are the ones that the multinational company would not exist without the SME, and certainly not at the entrepreneur level, because the entrepreneurs become SMEs, become the multinational companies if they follow that trajectory. And it's a common challenge for all of them. However, it means very different things when you're a company of 5 to 10 people, or you're an individual entrepreneur with an idea, than it may mean to a utility provider in California, which is a multi-billion-dollar a year business, or a multinational company, whether it's, again, an energy company or a wholesaler, a retailer. It could be Whole Foods, for example, that has a big supply chain. And then at the bottom, but wrapping everything, and ultimately what I would say drives it all, us, consumers, humanity, what we want, our wishes and our dreams, and what we want to eat, what we want to wear, where we want to travel to, how we want to interact, how we care about each other, how we care about the companies we support or don't, and ultimately what governments we put in place, who we hold accountable, what we prioritize as being important to us. And that is that I think so. It is a massive ecosystem that I'm sure we could have our own webinar just trying to break that down and who's involved. I choose to participate in one segment of that as each of us do, but I think in different parts of our lives we all participate in each one of those.
Mm-hmm. So what I'm hearing is that consumers do have a sense of responsibility to the world in which they live.
Oh, completely. I think whether consciously or not, it is the consumers that are going to drive what we do.
Yep.
Because that's the market, and if consumers don't value it for whatever reason, or they do value it for good or bad reasons, that's what's going to get things mobilized. Maybe not tomorrow, right? Where there's a time element of all of this, but certainly if you believe in the essence of a market economy, I do think that is what's going to drive any company and any entrepreneur. Otherwise, you're in a different place. I think you're in a different place.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. Aurele, Zach mentioned the importance of government policy in kind of helping to set the stage for a lot of these activities that might not otherwise, draw a lot of support or interest from private sector. You had the opportunity to advise the president of Benin. And he was working specifically to implement reforms to improve the investment climate of the country. Can you tell us a little bit more about what some of the key hurdles that were facing the country at that time, and what were some of the key reforms that you were working to promote?
Thank you very much. Helping my country from 2012 to 2016 was a privilege, also a great opportunity for me to go back home after 18 years in the US and serve and at that level of responsibilities and implement reform to improve investment climate. The president that called me was elected first time in 2006. He was a central banker. He was the president of the West African Development Bank. So he knew about development. So when he got in the power, he brought his former colleagues from central banks to be in the government to booster everything, but with the promise of making Benin an emerging country. So after a few years, I think he did not get the result he wanted. He was expected, whatever he promised to the country or the population, he did not make it. So he managed to get elected for the second term in 2011. And then he decided not to work only with a central banker from West Africa, to call the diaspora to be able to come and help. That's how my name come to the system and I was called. When I went back home, the key objective were to improve investment climate. How do you improve the ranking of Benin in the doing business class A score? That's because we were about 176 out of 183 in 2012, the last report. So that's one of the goals. So he asked me, we need to do what we need to do to improve that score. At the same time, he asked me to be able to promote the country so that it can be a better destination for investment. So I put a team in place. I started on January 2012. So I put a team in place to be able to work across government to be able to implement reforms. The first thing to do was set up a one-stop shop for open businesses. We used to create a business in 40 days or 35 days. So the process I put in place were able to create your business within hours, within days. So from 35 days to 3 days to 1 day and 2 hours. So we create that one-stop shop where anybody come to Benin to do business, they go to that office and that office take care of them from everything they have to do through the administration. That facilitates the processes to be able to give confidence to investors, both national and international, to be able to come to Benin and do business. For many years, government also want to do PPP projects. They're trying to create big projects without study. They want to do PPP. The PPP was just the buzzword they were using at that time. They have no rule, no regulation about PPP, no reglementation, nothing about rules to be able to put PPP in place. So what I did is to bring up some of my colleagues from the World Bank, some of the colleagues from African Development Bank and the French government to be able to help us to set up those processes. So today in Benin, we have a law for PPP. When you go to Benin to invest in project to do IPP, so those are, you have a clear rule you have to follow to be able to make that happen. So that's also one big thing. The third thing is we were doing work with a U.S. government to be able to benefit to get a MCC grant at that time. So, and the MCC, to get the MCC grant, you have clear criteria, clear indicator you have to follow and make the numbers before you can be accepted for those grants. So one of the responsibility also is to focus on my reform so that it will affect also a Benin getting to the MCC. So we work very hard to be able to improve the indicator for MCC so that in September 2015, we will be able to sign the new second compact for Benin. It's about more than $300 million with the US government, focused on energy. So through my office at the President Office, I work directly with all the investors. So we create one window so that when they come to the country, they meet with me, they meet with my staff to be able to sort out what they want to do so that we can send them to the right people in the government to be able to help them to achieve the objectives of investment. So doing those processes, I think I have learned a lot. I work with people. Reform is not easy. You have a lot of pushbacks from different stakeholders because they have different special interests. And when I came, so I had to move things around so that those interests, people are making money for many years without doing anything. So those reforms have to stop that processes. I even wrote a book when I finished in 2012. I wrote a book for the African diaspora. This is in French to be able to share my experience because we all dream to go back home and help, but it's not easy. We need to prepare ourselves mentally, physically, and ready to any pushback we can experience. And it has been for me a great experience. I learned more about my country and also help, I believe, my country. And after 4 years, I returned to Washington.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, and the challenges that, so, you know, doing these deals, and I admit, you know, clearly you worked were international development because there were a lot of, totally blanking on the word, acronyms that I do not know what you just said. So in terms of working with the US, you said there were a lot of projects there really focused on energy, you know, which of course is going to be directly impacted by climate and the challenges of climate. What were some of the conversations that you were having there in terms of helping investors really understand kind of what was involved with that and what were the risks on the horizon, and how was the government kind of preparing to mitigate those risks?
It's a communication. When investment, we don't have power, for example. We lack power. Blackout is a common. Okay, we experience that almost on a daily basis in Benin at that time. So one thing is to improve our own existing power producing capacity. Second is to be able to do more renewable, and we have many investors or promoters that come to Benin to be able to do renewable energy, but the problem we have, there was no rules. What the rules to be able to do renewable compared to a conventional energy? There's no such a rule. So we had to bring people in from the Ministry of Energy, which are specialized in those type of sectors, to have a true discussion with investors so that we can define clear rules to be able to do either a renewable energy or either conventional energy. So we are also trying to put in place, identify in the country the different sites which is very good for solar energy. It's going to be spread around the country, but we have identified some very unique sites that can capture very efficiently the sun to be able to produce energy at large scale, to be able to provide light for population in rural area. Those sites have been identified. So when people come, we have, okay, these are the sites we can use to be able to produce solar energy. And therefore, they don't start searching from everywhere. They know where to go, and they also have the experts to be able to identify what they need to do. We also have some sites which are very good for hydro. But the issue is the government does not spend money to do feasibility study. We know the site, we know that, okay, this is good for a hydro energy, but there's no feasibility study to be able to present to investors to say, okay, this is what we have as feasibility study, and this is how things can happen. So one of the things I pushed for in Benin also was to have government put money aside for developing projects. We have many project ideas, big ideas, but nothing is paper to be able to show that this is very serious. Because when people come, we say we want to build an airport here, we want to build this a 200 megawatt is a power plant, but there's no feasibility to be able to sustain that. Therefore, for 2014, 2013, and 14, government start putting money aside to be able to finance the feasibility study. So when investors come or we go abroad to be able to present the reform we are doing to different investors around the world, we bring those feasibility studies to show them we are serious, we are putting reform in place, we are doing feasibility studies for our key projects, and we want financing to be able to work on these things. So these are the type of conversation we have. And you have many people who were already involved in these type of activities, but were not efficiently. So either you have a lot of pushback from them, or you bring them along by communication, dialogue. That's one of the key things I have done also, is to communicate with the private sectors, because there were very big issue between the private sector and the public sector at that time. So one of the key issues or the thing I work on also was the dialogue. Communication between private sector, what are the issues? We can find solutions together, and we transform those solutions into reforms to be able to solve private sector problems. So it's a process. And it's okay. When I left, the current government has been doing that, and I passed on everything when I was I left 2016. So they continue doing reform. I think are much more better as we go today.
So yeah, I mean, it really sounds like there are some huge opportunities in these markets that, you know, private sector can potentially be pulled in to help resolve. And Zach, I'm wondering, could you help connect the dots there, right? That, you know, companies, you mentioned one in our earlier call, how really companies can turn climate challenges that we're facing into a competitive advantage. And so when you're looking at, you know, government regulations or goals that governments are setting and kind of putting it out there, and they're like, we've got this need, right? Or we want to work with these type of companies. Yes, they can certainly lean on the larger companies for that, but, you know, microgrids, and I mean, there are dozens, hundreds of small energy companies around sub-Saharan Africa that are building microgrids to kind of just, you know, power villages. Can you tell a little more, Zach, about like how companies, and really targeting the early stage companies for purposes of this conversation, but how can they kind of turn these challenges, these climate challenges, into competitive advantages?
Yeah, be happy to. Thanks. And really, always difficult to follow what Aurele is saying, because his career and his credentials and everything is so impressive. So I'll do my best here, but I certainly won't try to compete with it. I don't have the same. You know, I think you can have one of two mindsets when we look at regulation, policy, and big changes in the market. I think you can be whether you're put your hat on a second as a business person, whether you're part of a larger business or an entrepreneur that's looking to start a business or grow a business, but you're in that commercial mindset. I think you can have one mentality, which is, I won't do anything until I'm told to. You know, once the government regulates me to do it, of course I'll comply. I don't want to be on the wrong side of the law, but I'm going to go, you know, but until then, this is the pathway forward, and then I'll pivot and I'll make the adjustments that I need to. A more of a responsive mechanism, but perfectly acceptable. Plenty who do that and do it well. The other side, and this, I think this goes for whether you're the CEO of a Fortune 100 company or the head of a national state-owned enterprise, or whether you're a budding entrepreneur with a new idea, which is take a step back, look where the market is going, the market as defined by what people want around the world, and try to leapfrog and it's bolder, it's harder, but to look ahead and say, you know, I could create a business for 2022, but what I really want to do is create a business that's going to be relevant for 2025, 2030, 2035. It's hard to do, it's risky, but any business is risky to do, certainly. I think if you go in that mentality, And now let's connect that to the agenda around climate and climate change. You can start a business today and you could potentially leapfrog older or existing businesses that now have to go back and retrofit their systems, their processes, their supply chains to either respond to regulation that's being imposed, whether it's in the United States or whether it's Benin, wherever it's going to happen. And that could happen today. It could happen in 4 years. But I think most would agree it's going to happen. It's happening. Or so you could try, an existing business has to retrofit, has to find new supply chain partners or work with their supply chain partners or where they're sourcing things to try to reduce their carbon offset through, why are they, saying, why are they doing it? So let's say even the regulations don't yet exist, so they don't have to legally do it. Financiers want them to do it, perhaps private equity firms, perhaps their friends and their family. This is what they care about. Or at the end of the day, the consumers, right? How we can see what consumers can do to boycott a business and what it happens if they find out that they're not being transparent or they're not being green or they're not being sustainable, as we want to define that. So you have to go through and businesses, I work with businesses who are doing this in that transformation, in that transition, and find those opportunities. Now, if you're an entrepreneur, you can see that as a constraint and an added cost. Like, oh, I would have done this, but it's more expensive if I'm more green. Flip the narrative around and say, now these challenges, with every challenge comes opportunity, business opportunity. We need problem solvers who are creating the businesses of the future that are more climate friendly. That when Aurele goes to assess their climate risk financially, he actually doesn't have to charge a premium to that business nearly as much as he would another business, because the essence of their business plan has factored in and taken into account climate and has converted it into a competitive advantage for them. And saying, the way that I programmed my value chain or my supply chain to deliver this particular product, whatever that product is, whether it's an article of clothing or whether it's a part of a car, or whether it's a new software and technology that they're doing, it's a digital technology, but has consciously embedded that into their core of their business plan. And I would say that one of the greatest things, and what I write about this and believe it, but there's got to be a massive change in how CEOs, CFOs see natural capital as part of their business. It is now part of the P&L. It is not over here to the right or to the left. There is a cost to using nature's capital. There's also a discount if you don't use nature's capital in a more sustainable way. Can a company get better credit, better financing because they're preserving, protecting, or improving the air quality because of what they're doing? And at the same time, they will probably be charged a premium if they're depleting the quality of that capital. And that becomes part of their profit statement. That becomes something around which they will be invested on or they will not be invested into. So I think as an entrepreneur, as a small stage, early stage, think about these things, because while today you may be able to get a bank loan to start your business or early seed capital, which are not as hard hitting with some of these things, in 5 years, I believe that will not be the case. And I think it's just going to continue down that trend.
What you said really, really got me thinking about, all of the various ways that climate and the changes happening in climate can really impact just all facets of a business. You mentioned supply chain, labor. I'm thinking places around the world that are frequently used for, textile production, right? Like you've got whole parts of the world that are going to be unlivable in another 30, 40 years. Like people are migrating out of there. Like, are you going to be able to have factories there? And if not, where are those factories even going to go? Access to anything, mining, all of the things. Read an article, just yesterday on the destruction of some of the Indonesian forests. They're noticing their tiger populations are going up, the forests are shrinking. So it's where are the tigers even going to be if the forest is gone? And sort of everything that kind of comes with that. Yeah. And so, as founders really kind of grapple with the variety of things, are there sort of policies and protocols that you both have seen in terms of best practices for businesses, like, just questions that founders can ask themselves, designing a business for 3 or 5 years down the road, designing for supporting a need for companies or countries that they may not necessarily even be planning to right now. Can you maybe just kind of, give some of our listeners ideas in terms of like, what are just ways that they can kind of just get things in place today to maybe help them communicate to their stakeholders, to their team, their investors, that this is what they're doing?
One to answer that question from financial risk perspective, one of the things that emerging as a tool or approach to be able to address those questions is scenario analysis. Scenario analysis is critical. First of all, we need to start with disclosure. Disclosure is one of the things that have been in action for the last 3 years, TCFD disclosure, and where all the banks are required to disclose their exposure to climate risks and the climate change. And the recommendations from the TCFD are clear. And based on those recommendations, governance, strategy, risk management, and target and metrics, those recommendations allow every corporation, banks, including corporations, to be able to start reporting on annual basis, typical report to be able to address those 4 recommendations from the TCFD. And in addition to that, you have a scenario analysis. Climate change is complex. As a risk manager, we used to look at historical data to be able to predict tomorrow or futures. But in climate, we don't have that historical data. We don't know where fire is going to come from next year. And fire that we have in California today may not reflect what will come next year or in 2 years from now. So climate scenarios have been a tool that allow us to be able to, based on Paris Agreement, to be able to say, okay, these are the different paths we can take to be able to get to net zero by middle of the century, to be able to get to 2 degrees Celsius by middle of the century or at the end of the century. So on each of those different paths, you can evaluate your businesses. You can say, okay, if the world is going to be net zero in 2050, what are the paths that take us from here to there? So the paths we take into account, so socioeconomic implication, the land use, the natural capital use, the climate change, all those different aspects of the world will be used to be able to come up with the different paths that will lead us to 1.5 degrees Celsius by year 2050. And on each of those paths now, you can take your company along that path to see where you want to be. What are the opportunities, depending on the business you do? What are the risks for you based on today's business? If you are a bank, what are your risks for your portfolio in your business? So how do you grow your portfolio to be on that path of net zero by 2050? That creates the way for you to assess both risks and opportunities. And knowing the risks and the opportunities, you can now integrate that in your decision-making process to design the way you want to move forward in your business. And it's evolving. All the major banks are building today capacity to be able to assess a climate risk in terms of scenario analysis and stress testing. We know how to do stress testing in classical stress testing. The Fed gave us the scenarios and we run the scenario, we have the result. But for climate, we don't know what the scenario are going to be. Everything is the future. So the scientists come up with those scenarios. There are so many of them, but you have a network of greening finance, which is a body of a coalition of the winning, which is a body of central banks around the world. They started about 16 central banks 3 years ago. Now there are about 90 central banks in the world. US just joined them last year in December to be able to come up with a unified way to standardize those scenarios. So they come up with, in the last report they provide on June 7th this year, they provide the new scenarios which summarize them to about 6 scenarios. So each bank, each corporation can evaluate their business on those 6 paths to see where they can be in 2050. And therefore they can design their business, they can make the adjustment today to be able to reach the objective of the corporation or their board member in the future. So that's the approach that's been training, and that's what everybody is trying to build capacity to do.
And at what point, like, and Zach, I'll throw this to you, is it ever too early for a company to really start tracking this kind of stuff? I mean, the metrics, the footprint, the impact that they have, I mean, they're busy building their businesses, they're getting customers, they're building, like, they're frequently very small teams. They don't have time for this, right? Like, what would you say to them?
That would be a priority. Yeah. Go ahead, Zach.
Sorry. I was just going to say, I bet Aurele could weigh into this, and given all the work he's doing on doing business and trying to, the last thing you want to do is bog down emerging businesses with more reporting and more compliance, because that's time taken away from delivering the product, and to grow their business and to innovate. So there is a balance here. It would be ideal if I've started a business and been in the ups and downs of it. So I can speak from my own experience. It's hard. It's hard to start a business. It's hard to get that business to the next leg. And then you go through these inflection points of going from 1 person to 5 person, huge accomplishment. Then 5 to 15, the next curve. And then 15 to the doubling of that size, super hard. Businesses fail all along, and you're always, as leading that business, thinking, every time is money. My time is money, and I want to do the right thing. And at the same time, I need to grow my business. If you can, though, coming to your question that you had asked, I don't know that I have a specific tool or something that would be of use, but a little bit of advice based on the scars and that I've had to bear, and also what I believe, which is as leading a business, starting a new business, try to find the places where the reporting is part of your competitive advantage. You want to take the time and to track those metrics, or to track what you're doing from an early stage, even if it's not being asked of you from some authority or anybody. Because if you're helping to tell your story of why your business or your product is different in the market because it cares about this, then it is an investment to track that stuff and those metrics, so that you go to the market, you tell your story, and you have good data to tell the story. It's authentic, as opposed to just saying we're a green business. You can genuinely talk about aspects where you're a green business, and you'll soon learn. The market will tell you, your consumers will tell you, I really like that story. Keep doing it. Keep tracking those things. You'll get positive feedback, or you'll find out you were tracking 10 metrics and 6 of them are the ones that are resonating with people or banks or financiers. And maybe you need to put on ice the tracking of those other 4 till your business is a bit bigger and you have more resources. Quite frankly, you have more people to do it, because you need to reprogram your time to something else. And I think the other aspect of it is trying to keep, to me, it ties back together of coming back to what is going to be your unique value proposition in what you're doing. How are you differentiating yourself? And if you can, I believe, my hypothesis is that the market, businesses, banks, governments are going to start to more increasingly positively reward businesses that proactively look at these things, track them, and incorporate them into their core business practices. The businesses that just comply, the businesses that just write the annual report, fine, but it won't sustain itself in the long run. And my time horizon is not, will they be profitable in 5 or 10 years? Maybe they will. Maybe they'll be super profitable and have the largest IPO, that we've seen so far. But let's look beyond ourselves and our generation. Will that business be down there in 20 years, or will it get bought up? Will it be? No, because if you're not authentic about it, if you don't have that belief and incorporate it into your core business plan, whatever this may be, whether it's human rights, whether it's climate, whether it's non-corrupt practices, whether it's financial disclosures and transparency, diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace, you can do it. You can go through the motions, you can write the reports, and you can comply and get the check and so forth. But then it becomes truly a highly added cost to your business, and one that everybody within your business knows you're doing to comply, but you're not necessarily doing it because that is espousing who you want to be as a business. Try to align towards the one of saying, I'm doing this because it's part of me delivering the unique business I'm trying to deliver on. and then adjust it around there based on the feedback you're getting from the market. And again, my hypothesis, because this is my own business that we're trying to do, I try to do this every day, which is I believe the market is going to positively reward that. I believe that companies that do that, I believe energy companies that are more proactive on this are going to be positive, not only survive, will be positively rewarded in that space. Governments, the government of Benin will say, please come to my country to invest. I like you. I like your business. That's the kind of value. You can be profitable and you can help my people and be sustainable and help me achieve my climate goals all together. And no, you're not going to do it all at once, and you alone are not responsible for doing it. But I'll pick you over the other 5 who are providing similar services, because guess what? It's super competitive out there. We're not the only one. I'm not the only one doing what I'm doing. So it's, I think if getting in that headspace would be some advice I would try to give to an entrepreneur or a budding business leader, more so than like a toolkit or something that I would have off the shelf.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Aurele, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think this is a very good clarification. I think the ambitions, the goal of the company, the investor, the company is very critical, because the ambition defines how you get there. If you set your ambition at upfront today, you need to find ways to get there. And by finding ways to get there, that's where you become competitive, you become much more proactive, and you know what you're doing is not doing that. You're not doing that only for compliance purposes or regulatory purposes. You're doing that for business reasons. That's why, as a risk manager, we are proactively asking our corporation, our banks, to be able to integrate the climate risk today into decision-making process. People will tell you, oh, we always measure credit risk for centuries. We know how to measure credit risk. No, you don't know how to measure credit risk where you get to integrate climate. Because when you put climate in the equation, everything changes. It's not simple calculation of look at financial projection for 5 years. You need to go beyond that. You need to go to the scenarios. You need to go to hypotheses to see exactly how this business is going to be sustainable for the next 20, 30, 40 years. And where the world is going, we need to be able to maintain our competitiveness. We need to be able to change. And that change comes from leadership. That change comes from the ambition to be able to be competitive and to be players in the world we are today. And the world is changing. Nobody's going to, everybody will try to do something. Competition is very high. And I think the competitive edge needs to be built, and it takes preparation, it takes a budget, it takes resources, and in terms of people, money, all the tools you need to be able to achieve the goals. Set the ambition and bring the people to do the work to be able to achieve that objective is critical.
Yeah, and I think this is a good place to kind of drop in a question that we got from one of our participants, Wendy, where she's asking that the bigger question might be, you know, how do we educate founders and stakeholders and consumers on the benefits of including climate risk management just in their everyday life? You know, I mean, there's, you guys mentioned a couple of things, right? Like the from the top down, like government sort of telling companies like, hey, you need to meet certain standards to do this. But I mean, are the companies educating consumers? Like, how do we, I mean, this report that came out this week is pretty bleak, like, you know, and like how do we knock some sense into pretty much everybody to be like, this has to happen?
I can give you my example.
Please.
In my firm, I just won an award for knowledge sharing, risk awareness creation.
Great.
Because I believe that climate risk is very important. So over the last 2 years, I've been focused on that. And it takes time, because if you are a traditional risk manager, you don't understand climate. You need to be able to open your mind to understand climate, to see how it's linked to your traditional way to manage risks. So I have focused on that for the last few months to convince my management, to convince my team, to my colleagues, that climate risk is very important. We need to find a way to integrate that in our risk management processes. So I won an award for that. And it takes communication, research, consistency, resilience, and continue communication with your peers, your management, so that they can understand exactly why this matters. To be able to be competitive tomorrow, we need to be able to be ready today. And risk management is critical for evaluating not only the risks, is allocate capital, is help business strategy, and taking embedding climate in that process is very critical for the future of every banks or every financial institution in the world today.
Yeah, we almost need just big marketing campaigns for everyone, right? Zach, do you have anything you want to build on that?
Yeah, perhaps a few ideas. One is, it's always new business leaders or existing business leaders can learn a lot from other business leaders. Those who have done it, those who have had, we learn from each other and we take a lot of comfort and advice from people who have shared experiences. So I think if we can emanate and emulate those that are doing it or pushing it or trying to do it, that sets a trend for a lot of future business leaders or new emerging younger business leaders to say, wow, look at that entrepreneur, look at that CEO. They were able to do it without, destroying the environment, without destroying people, with adhering to the proper human rights in the supply chain. I love, what gets me going is I look at different companies out there and I say, who would I want to be like? Which company would where would I want to work? Because it starts at the top, right? Well, which company's leadership is setting the trend that they're not getting it perfect. Nobody gets it perfect. Everybody has blunders. Everybody has place to improve, but says I would love to have a business that is similar to that, right? That is making a profit, but also delivering all of this value. So learning, showcasing those stories. There's one out there. If you look at, the shoe manufacturing Puma, which I believe is a German company, their CEO was the first one to publicly disclose a profit and loss statement that factored in natural capital and their use of natural capital into there. It's groundbreaking, and those types of stories I think are inspirational for other leaders who want to do that. So I think that's one area. The other area is a lot of this happens at the academic level. Where our future leaders, whether it's undergraduate or graduate school, and I say those because they're getting closer to professional working age, where they're learning the principles of what are we teaching our students of what is good business practice, what are MBA programs teaching them, Masters of Economics programs, about what economic behavior looks like and what it should be, so that then when they step out in the workplace, they have those principles, those ethics, that kind of thinking. From their education system, whether public or private or both, but it's espousing a set of parameters that we were not doing 30 years ago, or even when I was in school 20 years ago, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's such a uphill battle. And, what we're doing here at Bethesda Green and trying to educate founders and encouraging them to, educate their stakeholders and educate their investors. And I feel it's such a two-way street, right? Zach, you talked earlier about the ecosystem and all of the different players, right? And it's this, and what we're hearing from panelists in other sessions as well, it's the investors, the government entities, be it local, be it, federal, essentially kind of saying, these are the things we expect to happen. If we're going to be working with you, if we're going to support, we're going to send you money, we're going to do anything, like we need to see this. And this can be, any number of things, but they have a choice on who they work with. And if every player within the whole ecosystem chooses to work with the companies that demonstrate kind of an awareness and a transparency about how they're addressing these topics, that can sort of help lift, everyone, and kind of pushing toward that. In a shameless plug, I will kind of say we have had, because these conversations have occurred through the speaker series. I'm going to add the link. We don't have all of the videos up yet from the past ones, and our amazing impact intern Caroline is writing up summaries of some of the past ones, but conversations talking about how businesses can report their impact, how, what tools they can use, green business certifications, and how, Wendy, to your question, like how can we educate consumers? You go to the store and you don't know what the B means when you look at a product, right? Because it doesn't, like, it's new to you. And so you don't know whether that's a good thing or not. And trying to kind of help people wade through this very, wave of information about what really matters or not. So we do have a few more minutes. I definitely want to ask our attendees to please share questions in the Q&A if you have anything for our panelists. I want to throw it to you guys while that's happening. Is there, how best to allocate resources to mitigate risk, right? Zach, you talked earlier about time and costs of doing things. I mean, the cost of not doing these things is pretty high as well. How would you kind of think about that balance? And really, like, I guess, just sort of guidelines, right? Like, at what point do you say, I'm going to start actually putting real money toward, addressing this? And at what point is it too early to really kind of make that happen? And this is to both of you.
Aurele, did you want to go first?
What I will say is to start with an assessment of materiality of that. And based on the materiality, you can say how much resources you need in terms of staff, budget, and so forth. That's the way I'm approaching that here. We do the groundwork analysis and demonstrate that this is very important. And then we make requests of resources to do allocation clearly. That's for the process of doing it. But now, for the process of investment, clearly through the investment channels, clearly there's a lot of opportunity to invest. And I know everybody has to define their ambition to see what your target to be able to do green, for example. If you set your target to be very high, so you need to be able to generate that much volume to your business. And again, this depends on the ambition of, and depends on the sector as well. And also jurisdiction, because each country makes law in terms of climate. That's why each country has the NDCs to be able to define how they want to attack climate they revise that every 5 years. So the ambition of each country is in the NDCs. And when you're doing business in a specific country, it's very important to know what the policy are going to be. If they're going to be a carbon price, for example, how do you integrate that in your business model? It's very important. So it depends on sectors, jurisdiction, and the strategy of the corporation.
Thank you. Zach, anything you want to add?
Sure. Maybe I'll just add a little bit is to I would say have a multi-year vision of and have inflection points at which you would scale up your work in this space. So again, come back to the basic of integrate this from day one into your business model, so that it is not something that once you hit a certain level of scale, you then have to address. You're addressing it throughout. That being said, there's a pragmatic point of starting and running a business where you can't have it all at once and you have a vision of where you want it to be. And also it's got to be fit for purpose for the size of your business. How you report as an individual micro enterprise versus an enterprise of 500 people is very, very different. So I'm not aware of a perfect formula that says, when you turn over this amount of revenue, then you should be spending X percentage on that kind of thing. I do think, though, that you could take a step back and sketch it out and say, all right, here are the different phases of how I see my business growing and what would be appropriate because my customers care about it. These are the inflection points that I would ratchet it up. And I think a lot of that is also going to become a bit obvious organically, because when you go to the next level of funding, probably somebody's going to ask the question, if I give you this money, what are you going to do? Which is going to get the entrepreneur, the CEO to say, okay, now, here's what I was doing. Now I need to bring it to the next level, and then when you get to the next level, or when you go public, or, however you grow your business there, I think there will be those external forces and those triggers that will help you know when the right time is to hit the next level of scale in terms of investment in that space.
And and this may not be necessarily in your wheelhouses, but the thought of like, how do CEOs, or what have you seen that works really well for how CEOs can get out their impact message of their company to an external audience without sounding too self-serving?
Yeah, good and tough question. The best CEOs are the ones who don't put their offices too high up that they can't go down and reconnect on an everyday basis with whom they're trying to ultimately provide value to, whoever that is, whether the client is a government entity and the people therein, or it's the individual consumer. And the best way to do it is to get your beneficiaries, get your consumers telling your story. Don't tell your own story. It's the word of mouth. That's the best way to do it. And why do people do that? I say, Aurele, I bought this product. You should buy it too. Go check it out. It's so good, and the quality is so great. And the story behind it is even better. This is the jobs they're creating. This is the impact they're having. And then you go and you find it and it resonates with you. And so it's actually not the CEO or the team or the comms team that has to do all of this, but they're actually letting the others speak, sing their praises, so to speak. And then it's not so self-serving and self-aggrandizing, but it's actually letting the market do it for you. Tough to do, no question about it. But it does happen, right? In the same way that I would turn around and I could spoil the lot pretty quickly with a bad Twitter post and say, oh, I just tried this new restaurant. It was horrible, and the people were unfriendly and the food was rotten and, nothing worked, and don't go. It's the same. It works both ways. So you have to be careful to trust your consumer, because they're like, it's like my 5-year-old daughter. She'll always speak the truth, whether she likes it or not, whether I like it or not. At the same time, when it's positive, right, there's nothing more glowing and better.
Right. And, so I guess this leads to another question we got in the chat, really asking why aren't companies moving faster to adapt and make their practices more sustainable? And I guess in line with this, are they actually doing things and just not telling consumers? Like, are things happening kind of behind that? She asked that, she's like, I know there's some positive examples like Puma, but overall, it seems to her that many companies are content continuing with business as usual, even though, like, the market as a whole, we're increasingly able to see how destructive it is.
I think it depends on you have, when you are running a company, particularly public company, you have the obligation to report on quarterly basis. The short-term impact is very critical. They have that pressure on the management every day, so they have to deliver every quarter a result. So the management is the one that you have to take into account, both short-term and long-term. So by taking the long-term, they're behind the scene, try to strategize for long-term. I was listening to Jeff Bezos, a speech one day where he said, he does not think about what will happen next quarter. So he thinks more next will happen 2, 3 years, 5 years time, because he's way ahead of, he's thinking more on the long-term basis than short-term. People who will take out the short-term time, they're already working on daily basis to make sure that they have the number for on quarterly basis. So integrate that strategy in the business model is very critical. And a way to communicate that also is has to be, like Zach just said, it can be positive or negative. So if you go being too aggressive, it can go against you. And this type of the climate stuff is very important. In Europe, it's much more different because you have regulation pushing for it, and everybody has to do it. So here in the US, we are not there yet. So we regulation are not fully imposing anything to consumer yet, or to corporation yet. So that will come over time, I believe. And so the people will behave differently. You have CEO Larry Fink is talking about climate risk is an investment risk, and he's very vocal about it. He went to his shareholder about it. So that's a very leadership position being taken in the industry here in the US or globally. So some of those leaders will be doing about with like him, and hopefully as time move on, so we should be able to have those change in the industry globally.
Yeah. And hopefully all of the reporting and the sort of oversight that's happening, be it from the governments, from certifications, from anyone, can kind of help reduce any risks that companies may be greenwashing some of the efforts that they're doing, and consumers can have an increased level of trust in what they're hearing coming out of these companies. I want to be sensitive of time. We are wrapping up here. Do either of you have any kind of final last words? We covered a lot. I mean, climate risk management, financial risk, how to, startups and founders to be able to communicate what it is they're doing to their stakeholders. Did we miss something? Do you want to kind of share some information, some final words?
I think from my end, I would just a bit of a positive note, which is you know, the climate story in front of us has yet to be told. It's unfolding. We see, unfortunately, the negative impacts of it. And those capture the headlines because they have real human life impacts, tragedies and travesties and environmental impacts, which are horrible. At the same time, there's a lot of good happening. There's a lot of change happening, and it takes a while. Change takes a little bit of time. To the last question, why aren't CEOs and companies changing? I think a lot of them really are. But to Aurele's point, there are also a lot of pressure points that need to become undone in order to rewire a company, whether it's because at the same time, they have a huge responsibility to contribute to pension plans and pension investors. And nobody's going to be happy to say, make your company more green, but sure, I'll take a 20% loss on my investment. Nobody wants that overnight. So we have to, unfortunately, have patience, even though patience doesn't help when we see the headlines every single day. But I do think that all of it, at the end of the day, you know, there's a green revolution going on. There's an exciting time. There's more opportunity than not for us all to be involved in whatever form and way. And I think we're going to come out of this, and then we will be facing the next challenge, because that's inevitable. I don't know what that will be, but we will have come a long way. I think we'll see it's going to push the human to do some amazing, creative, innovative, disruptive, positive things. I'm excited to see that happen.
Excellent. Aurele, any final words from you?
I'm being positive as well and excited about this moment we are going through. A lot is happening and in different sectors around the world, and we need to keep up with the pace, because it's changing every day. And from us, like risk manager, we are looking to methodology that's being built, that's been changing on daily basis, and we try to adapt to the new reality. When there is no data. So you need to be able to adapt your model, you need to adapt your methodology as things go. So more information you get, more adaptation you have to do to be able to make sure that you're helping your management to be able to do the right thing in terms of allocating capital at a good place for the good of the world.
Yeah, I got to say, gentlemen, you know, topic is sort of difficult and bleak as, you know, climate change can be. You guys definitely helped end it on a good note. And I feel as though the future can indeed be bright. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with all of us. And thank you all for joining us this morning. It's really just been a pleasure chatting with both of you and hearing all of the questions. So
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you so much.
Bye. Thanks,
Take
Zach.
care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Bye.